Good evening, welcome in everybody. I'm Reggie Chapman. Happy NFL Draft Night to all that celebrate. Welcome to 11 Live Sports Extra Draft Night Special. Over the course of our show, we'll be reacting live to the early picks of the NFL Draft and going to the Falcons training facility live to break down what the Falcons decide to do. Meanwhile, the excitement is already fully underway in Detroit. That's where we find our Maria Martin, who has more.
Hey, Reggie, it is a beautiful day here in Detroit as we get started with the NFL Draft. We're going to meet the first of those newest Atlanta Falcons thanks to the first round. And them picking at 8 opens up the door for a lot of different possibilities. And the Falcons need a lot of things. They need a defensive lineman, an edge rusher, a corner, and perhaps even a quarterback. They've even fielded some calls so far to trade their picks. So a lot of things can happen. But no matter how you shake it, there are 32 different draft boards available out there. So the Falcons' plan going into today could honestly be blown up with the picks that happened before them. That's the nature of the draft. It's also important to have many different options and scenarios, and General Manager Terry Fontenot gave us a peek behind the curtain on his philosophy of not reaching for a need.
You got the different categories, right? You have the impact players, you have the elite players, you have the solid starters, you have the functional starters, you have the role players, the developmental, you have all these categories. So in most cases, you're going to have more than one position in that category. What you don't want to do is if you have a couple players in this category and you have more of a need and it's down this, and so as opposed to taking an impact player, you're taking a functional starter, or that's the key.
Now there are 13 different NFL prospects here in Detroit hoping to hear their name called and walk across that big stage behind me and shake the commissioner's hand. Now 2 guys who have been heavily connected to the Falcons as possibilities for them this evening at pick number 8, 2 edge rushers, Dallas Turner and Laiatu Latu. Both of them are here, so perhaps they do hear their name called by the Atlanta Falcons at 8. We will see. Reggie, back to you.
All right, thanks, Maria. We'll hear from you a little bit later tonight as we are currently, though, inching towards the Falcons pick at number 8. So let's go to the Falcons training facility in Flowery Branch and bring in Joe Patrick from 92.9 The Game, who is live out there. Joe, first off, how are things looking out there, and what's kind of the energy heading into this pick?
Well, it's a beautiful night. It's a little bit quiet here, I would say, at Flowery Branch, but I don't think it's going to be quiet for too long because the Falcons are on the clock right now, and it's kind of a fascinating situation for them with the players who are on the clock. And are the Falcons actually going to even make this pick? I think that's the question that we're going to have answered here for us in the next 15 minutes or so, is whether they're going to be moving around this draft. We heard a lot coming into this NFL draft in general that teams were going to be moving around, and we've not yet seen a trade happen. So could the Falcons be the first one? I think we're about to find out.
Joe, I'm curious, as we get to go into this pick, did you have a direction or maybe a player that you like the most heading into this pick? Who do you think the Falcons are going to do?
Well, I think the Falcons have genuine needs in this draft, which hasn't really been the case. I mean, they have had needs in the past couple of years, but they've been really in this kind of rebuilding project. And now that you've signed a quarterback like Kirk Cousins, who you're paying a lot of money to, and that kind of creates more of a short-term time horizon for you to start winning games, you really need to make sure this team is buttoned up and ready to win now. And if the Falcons are going to win, they're going to have to rush the passer. They don't really have a premier edge rusher, so that's a position that certainly is of need for this team, as well as cornerback. Last year, they had a veteran, Jeff Okudah, signed to play alongside A.J. Terrell in the secondary. Jeff Okudah has left the team. The team drafted Clark Phillips last year in the 4th round, but are the Falcons actually comfortable with him going into the season as the starter opposite A.J.? I don't think they are. I think that they'll probably take a corner in this draft, and I think that the big question mark whenever they pick in this first round is what position will they take, because they clearly have 2 big needs on that defense.
Well, let's get a little bit crazy. Let's say hypothetically they don't go for defense and they maybe go offensive, right? Going into this draft, before they decided to sign Kirk Cousins, there was so much talk about maybe going potentially after a quarterback. They do sign Kirk Cousins, so you've got that position locked down. Do you see them maybe doing something like that this draft?
They very well could. I mean, the pick is apparently in for the Falcons, so we'll see what happens. But, Rome Odunze is on the board for the Falcons, one of the top 3 receivers by all accounts in this draft, and a guy who was prolific in college. I think Rome Odunze, the fact that he was on the board was reason for the Falcons maybe potentially being able to trade this pick for a team that might want to come up. But they could very well go ahead and take Rome Odunze here. I think it would be fascinating to see if they were to double down on the offensive side of the ball. And Reggie, if you look around the league now in the modern NFL, the best teams, the teams that win Super Bowls, they score points, and some of them have better defenses than others, but the common denominator between all these teams is that they're able to score pretty much at will, and especially against the toughest defenses that you'll be facing in the playoffs and on the road and in tough conditions. And so I wouldn't be surprised at all. And frankly, clearly the team's track record these past few years has been to invest these top draft capital picks into those explosive playmakers on offense.
Yeah, Roma Odunze, man, a big-time threat in the red zone. You had another big body, hypothetically, for this offense, 6'3", 215 pounds. Do you think that would be a pick that would work just based off of what they have? I mean, why do you think it's important to go after maybe a wide receiver for this group that already has a couple of offensive pieces already in place?
Yeah, I think it's just because you always want to be continuing to add to that group. And then another player, and I think he's being highlighted on TV right now, is Michael Penix Jr., a player that has reportedly the Falcons have had a lot of interest in, but they already have a quarterback. Would they actually pull the trigger on that kind of a move, especially with J.J. McCarthy still on the board as well? There's lots of fascinating options for the Falcons to go to right now, but it certainly seems like, if they were to go on the offensive side of the ball, I would have to think it would be Roma Odunze, because he's the player that would add the most value for you immediately. He would come in and be a starter on this offense, despite the fact that the Falcons have already, drafted guys like Drake London, Kyle Pitts, and they signed Darnell Mooney in free agency. This new offensive scheme that we expect from Zach Robinson is going to feature 3 wide receivers. So there's really still one starting wide receiver role that's kind of up for grabs in this Falcons offense. And so that would be one of the reasons they might want to go and head that way towards Roma Odunze and those Washington Huskies.
I was about to say, how about maybe on that offensive line as well? Is that a place that they could probably go as well? Joe Alt already off the board, but maybe this is going to be a very good tackle draft. Do you think that Kirk Cousins, coming off that torn Achilles, is going to need some extra help blocking up front?
It's a great tackle draft, and listen, I do think the Falcons will invest in the offensive line in this draft. I just do not expect it to happen here with the 8th pick, because it's a lot of draft capital for a position, frankly, that they already have covered. Granted, a guy like Caleb McGarry might not be the best tackle in the league, but I think he's certainly one that the Falcons will be happy with going into the next season. And we have the pick that's come in right now, and it is Michael Penix Jr.
Wow.
The quarterback out of Washington.
Wow.
That is a shocking result in this draft for the Falcons.
Well, let's just take a second to unpack that. We talked about it, right? Kirk Cousins is already in the building. Michael Penix is a guy that, for a long time going into this draft, people worried about whether he'd be ready physically, right? Dude ran a 4.4 at his combine. He showed all the passing ability. But I guess, what is your just first reaction to this pick? Do you think this was the right pick for this team?
Well, it really is fascinating, and I'll tell you one of the reasons why I'm a little bit in shock, Reggie, because I did not expect this, and for this reason, because of what we were just talking about with this team kind of in this win-now mode. You figured that this team would want to ensure that they were able to do that as quickly as possible, and by picking Michael Penix Jr., that is clearly a pick that is not necessarily meant for now. It's meant for later. Frankly, it's meant for after you're through this Kirk Cousins era, and that's a lot of capital that they're investing into that pick. Again, picking 8th for the 3rd season in a row. And listen, I know for a fact that this organization has liked Michael Penix Jr. for a long time, and clearly they have loved him to the point where they're going to invest this pick in him. But I do think that this pick is going to be judged pretty harshly by Atlanta Falcons fans who had heard this rumor kind of rumbling around, especially the last couple of weeks. It had gained traction, but I don't think anybody, including myself, really thought there was a ton of legs to it, just because they have these other needs. And Michael Penix is a really interesting guy. Like you said, he's dealt with some injuries, not just dealt with some injuries. I mean, he's had 2 season-ending injuries in his career, in his college career. He's come back from both of them. Obviously, made it to a national championship game last year. I will say, I think the one thing, if I'm to just kind of think about, we'll hear from Raheem Morris and Terry Fontenot later on tonight, and that should be fascinating to hear their answers to this draft pick. But Michael Penix ran a pretty complex scheme in Washington, and it required a lot of motions, a lot of pre-snap stuff, and you have to think that when you're bringing in this new coaching staff with Raheem Morris, he tabbed Zach Robinson to be his offensive coordinator. Not only is Zach Robinson, do we think he's going to be a decent play caller, having grown and learned from Sean McVay, but before that, he evaluated quarterbacks for Pro Football Focus, one of the top analytic companies in the world, football analytic companies in the world. Before that, he helped actually train college potential draftees for the NFL draft before they went to the combine and these types of things. And so you would think that, and I certainly thought that this team would draft a quarterback in this draft because you want to utilize that kind of background that Zach Robinson has to be able to identify the kind of quarterback that might suit your system. Just so happens to be the case that he identified, we can presume, a quarterback that they were going to need to spend first-round draft capital on to be able to acquire. And I will give it this to the Falcons. They were not shy about doing this, and they're going to get, I think, raked over the coals by Falcons fans for it. But I'll give them, listen, they shot their shot, right? They weren't going to let the outside noise kind of dictate what they should do with this pick, and clearly they have a gut feeling about Michael Penix Jr., and he's the newest Atlanta Falcon.
Well, I'll tell you, Joe, one thing for me, just thinking about it, heading into this offseason, it's going to be a lot more fun doing our job. I mean, it feels like and it has been the last couple of years. 4 years in a row, they've made an offensive selection at that number 8 overall pick. I mean, is this maybe the most surprising one? Obviously, I think Bijan Robinson was a big deal when you picked in that high. Drake London, a big deal as well. Kyle Pitts, really high draft pick for a tight end. But with Michael Penix, he's the 4th quarterback off the board. He's a guy that a lot of people have been worried about. They didn't think he'd actually be able to get picked in the top 10. Nobody really saw this coming. I mean, everybody said maybe a J.J. McCarthy somehow works his way up into the top 10. Michael Penix is up here going number 8 to the Atlanta Falcons. What will we remember about this moment, man? I mean, I'm lost for words as to this decision. And, I mean, where do they go from here with this? I mean, is he worth this much draft capital being this high?
I mean, I certainly thought he was going to be not just a first-round pick. I thought he would probably be drafted in the top of the first round. In fact, I think a lot of people were projecting if Michael Penix were to go at 8 or if Michael Penix were to go in the top of the first round, I think a lot of people were projecting that would have happened by way of a trade with the Falcons trading away this 8th pick to somebody else who would then take him, just because, again, to kind of reiterate the point that we've been talking about, that he's just like the Falcons could not afford to spend this amount of capital on a player who, frankly, is not going to see the field. Reggie, I should say, unless maybe there's some, I don't know about concerns. I don't want to kind of, assume anything, but, Kirk Cousins is coming off an Achilles injury. A lot of teams used their backup quarterbacks last year. If you look around the league, almost all of them had to use their backup quarterback at some point. I will also say that this team has a veteran backup quarterback who's the backup quarterback they had last year in Taylor Heineke. But again, it's kind of hard to justify the value in Michael Penix for this team this year, just because you are clearly invested in Kirk Cousins. So, listen, and I say all this, and the kid, I couldn't have more respect for him with, again, the adversity that he's dealt with in his college career, to have transferred schools and then reached the pinnacle of the college game. I think when you're looking at, I think that's what I expect to hear from Terry Fontenot and Raheem Morris, is that kind of, that championship pedigree, that winner's mentality that he has and he's going to bring to this team. But again, it is obviously really shocking news.
Yeah, no shortness of winning for that kid, man. Never lost at home while he was at Washington. Led Washington to the national championship game. His teammate, Rome Odunze, actually just went off the board at number 9, which means that we're waiting to see what happens at number 10. But just really, really interesting there, man. I do want to try and just take a second or give you a chance to kind of breathe and think about some of these other picks as we kind of move our way back through the first half of the top 10 picks, where we start with number 1 at Caleb Williams. I mean, we'll just say that one was not a surprise at all. The Bears have been known to mess up some quarterbacks over their time. 30 touchdowns, 5 interceptions a year ago. He's been really the first overall pick for multiple years now. Do you think they'll mess this one up again, or do you think they're in a better position now with both Caleb Williams and now having picked Rome Odunze at number 9 to be able to really play well going forward?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think I look at this Bears roster, and it's scary looking, frankly. And, Caleb Williams, yeah, he's a rookie, but, I mean, he was the number 1 overall pick for a reason. I think this guy is going to be a really good pro, and I think that if there's any quarterback in this draft who's going to be a good one from day one, it's probably Caleb Williams, because he's kind of got it all. He's got the arm strength, he's got the accuracy, he's got the ability to escape the pocket. He can escape the pocket and then throw. He's basically got everything in his arsenal. I think the main kind of worry that teams have, well, there's a couple. One is like the off the field stuff, and not that he's ever gotten in trouble or anything, but just that he's a character. He enjoys it. We saw in the draft he was kind of hyping up the crowd and stuff. But then also, can he avoid taking sacks? I think that's the big thing for Caleb Williams because he's held on to the ball for a long time when he's been in the pocket at USC. He's gotten the most time in the country to throw, going back a few years in college football. And that's partially due to his own ability to find space in the pocket, which is one of the reasons why they drafted him. But, I expect him to be really good. And when you look at the supporting staff, again, you mentioned it, they got Rome Odunze now from Washington, who, frankly, I thought the Falcons might take with their 8th pick, but they didn't. They've got some other playmakers there. You look at DJ Moore, you look at Keenan Allen, who they picked up in free agency, some really good veterans who Rome Odunze can learn from.
I'm curious also, as we look at picks number 2 and number 3, we had a pretty good idea that we'd see 3 straight quarterbacks come off the board. The question was, would it be Heisman Trophy from 2 years ago and then last year's Heisman Trophy winner going at number 2? Jaden Daniels was that selection at number 2. What do you think maybe separated him from Drake May, who went at number 3?
Yeah, I can't get inside the minds of the Washington front office and Dan Quinn, the new head coach there, who of course is the former Falcons coach. But something that Dan Quinn said was that he was looking for his next Matt Ryan, who he had here in Atlanta and obviously held the starting quarterback job for the better part of 14 years. And I think that's obviously what they'll be looking for. And Jaden Daniels is a guy who can just be the franchise quarterback for that team. Now, it's going to be interesting to see how he develops because he has such a unique playing style. And I know nobody knows it better than you, Reggie, at LSU. But, he's obviously got a ton of talent, can make all the throws. There's probably going to be, I think, a little bit more of a learning curve for him than there is for Caleb Williams. And same for Drake May. I think there will be more of a learning curve for him over the top quarterback, Caleb Williams, as well. But I do expect Jaden Daniels to ultimately be a really good pro, and that's why the Washington selected him 2nd overall. For a long time, it was kind of undetermined. We didn't really know how much Washington liked Jaden Daniels as compared to Drake May, but I think over the last couple weeks, the reports really started to emerge that Jaden Daniels was the guy, and I don't think it really came as much surprise to many people that he ended up being that 2nd pick overall.
Look, I know that you get a chance to really look at a lot of tape, and you're really breaking things down, Joe, but even if you're a person that just hops on YouTube and checks out maybe some of the videos, it's pretty clear. I mean, Jaden Daniels has some incredible stuff he's put on tape. Drake May, at times, has looked a little bit of shaky in moments, but still goes to number 3 overall because of the whole projection idea, right? He's a raw talent, went to North Carolina, not a traditional football power. Do you think this works for the Patriots at number 3?
We'll see. I wouldn't have been surprised if the Patriots had traded away this pick as well, just because I feel like they're so far away. But again, I think that's the thing for Drake May, and you talked about it. He's more of a raw talent than some of these other quarterbacks. He'll probably sit behind Jacoby Brissett, I would imagine, definitely to start the season. We'll see if he's able to break in and become the starting quarterback during the season. But I think he's got plenty of protection there in that situation that he's in, where there's no real pressure for him to step into a winning team and really win now. In fact, I think the Patriots will probably be drafting right up at the top of the draft, similar to where they're drafting this year when they come around next year, which again is one of the reasons why I thought they could potentially trade this pick away, pass on him this year. But I think it also speaks to the fact that this is a really good quarterback class this year, and it's not going to be that way next year. So they went ahead and took their shot on Drake May, and you can't really complain about him that much. But something that you said earlier, Reggie, is that J.J. McCarthy is still out there. A lot of people were projecting him to go in the top 5 picks. A lot of people were projecting if he were to slip past 5, then maybe the Falcons would trade out of their 8th spot for maybe the Raiders, the Broncos, or the Vikings to come up and trade for him. But we still have not seen him go yet. So it's pretty interesting how all the quarterbacks are kind of rounding out in this first round.
Look, we're talking about all the quarterbacks, and I gave you a quick second to break down some of the other ones, but we got to go back to Michael Penix, who, of course, could potentially be the future of this team. Last time they picked the quarterback early, it was a guy that didn't really work out that well, got to hop right into the spotlight in Desmond Ridder. How do you think it works going forward with Kirk Cousins and our new quarterback here, Michael Penix Jr.?
Well, I mean, the reason why Falcons fans are not going to be happy with this pick, is when we talked about this before, is that he's not going to add value right away. But I do think that he is in a great spot for his career with the Falcons. Again, when you think about the coach that he's going to be learning from in Zach Robinson, and frankly, Raheem Morris. Even though Raheem Morris is a defensive coach, Raheem Morris has been learning from the best offensive coaches for the majority of his career. So, he's going to get great coaching, get that great learning experience. And I think one of the reasons why the Falcons should have taken a quarterback in this draft at some point, and they ended up taking him with their first pick, is because you have Kirk Cousins there, who's going to be the kind of model for an incoming quarterback to learn from. And I'm not talking about learning the plays or learning how to make throws. I'm talking about learning how to prepare yourself day in, day out, getting ready for games. What do you need to do mentally, especially, to make sure that you're ready to play on Sunday? It's such an important task. And then to go back to Michael Penix's strengths about his game, it is his head, a lot of it. He is, again, at Washington, he was running a pretty complex offense, and I just think that he is personally in a great spot. I think he'll probably be a good quarterback for the Falcons eventually, but that doesn't help them in these next few years, so we'll see how it all ends up.
Man, what a time to be in Atlanta, man. Another exciting draft pick for this team. I just can't believe it. And I'm so happy that I got a chance to kind of break it down over here with you, Joe. Nobody better in the business to do it. By the way, we got a couple more guys that we're kind of looking after, Brock Bowers and Ladd McConkey, hoping to see them potentially get picked in the first round. We know Brock is going to go first round. How soon he gets selected, we need to figure out. Ladd McConkey as well could be a first-round selection. But all that we'll be able to talk about in the next coming weeks, days, and months. Joe Patrick, thank you very much for your time, man. And thank you guys so much for watching our special here. The brand new news, Michael Penix Jr., the new quarterback for the Atlanta Falcons, picked at number 8. I'm sure we'll have all sorts of reaction coming up a little bit later. Maria Martin is in Detroit, and hopefully she'll get a chance to talk to him. And, of course, we'll hear from Terry Fontenot about that pick coming up a little bit later tonight. Thank you guys so much for watching. We'll see you guys soon.